Hello, one and all, and welcome to Creative Spark, my interview show where I talk to cool people about the cool things that they do. With me today is the most horror-y of D&D people, Ben.
Thank you for having me. And that's an apt description. I like to think of myself as the most terrifying game master that folks will ever have the privilege to play, or the unfortunate privilege to play at my table. So, yeah.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a little later here. I'm in Australia. I'm used to recording in the morning, which is when we usually do our podcast, the Eldritch Lorecast, is recorded 9 a.m. Australia time. So 7 p.m. here currently. I'm a little sort of ready, not ready for bed, but getting there, you know. But I always enjoy a good discussion. So when I got your email, I was like, okay, yeah, let's do this. I like talking about things. I like talking RPGs.
I think that's the general consensus in the way that everyone signed up, agreed to it, is to people like, yeah, I like to talk. Talking's fun. Like, yeah,
I mean,
got you.
the folks that you're reaching out to, I saw a bit of your interview with Antonio, and YouTubers like to talk. It's kind of their trade in a way, is to fan out about stuff and talk about the things they like, and that's kind of really how we built our YouTube channel at Ghostfire. Was when they put me in charge of it. I was just like, can I talk about whatever I want? And they were like, I mean, yeah, basically. And I was like, sick. And it just so happened that the stuff I like overlaps very strongly with the IPs that Ghostfire publishes for. So it kind of freakily worked out really well. People think that I originated Grim Hollow, the campaign setting, the kind of dark fantasy setting. It was not my original setting. The one that I played in my home games was very, very similar. I know I'm answering a question you didn't ask. The
This
games
is the ideal. Please
the
go
games
on.
that I ran were very, very similar. It was a very similar setting, and so it was easy for me to adopt Grim Hollow. I didn't originate the setting, but it was a kind of freaky match made in the netherworld because it's everything I love about how I like to play D&D. So, yeah.
What is it about the horror stuff that draws you into that aspect of D&D? Because that's obviously not something that's found. It can be something that's found natively in D&D, but I think a lot of
Sure.
DMs tend to move away from that aspect of things.
Yeah, I think that for me, what the genre I really love, I use the phrase dark fantasy, which is kind of like the new metal of genres in terms of like it's a little bit of everything, but it's not quite entirely something
Uh,
else, you
yeah,
know?
I think you're really right, which has kind of caused me some emotional and psychic damage, but that's fine.
Yeah, because dark fantasy definitely draws very heavily on horror, and I do love horror, but I can't watch horror movies. Like I'm not a slasher movie kind of guy. And it draws on, there are people often mistake it for the genre of grimdark, which is famously a term coined from Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Fantasy and Games Workshop's games. And it the surface level, it's all very similar. But for me, dark fantasy is a way of telling stories that do feel very grounded, that do draw on horror themes, but they're also, the intention is that they're emotionally effective. They're engaging because you're engaged in the stakes of the world as if it were real, as opposed to sometimes D&D, I refer to it as bouncing jumping castle D&D, which is just, everybody's like, throw a fireball and I cast this and I do this and I try to woo the dragon, even though it's a dragon and I'm just a tiny mortal. And, that's great fun and has its place. And people obviously enjoy that style of D&D very, very much. I think it's a very legitimate way of playing. But I like to tell stories that feel grounded and real, and people emotionally engage with their characters and emotionally engage with the other characters in the world and the stakes of the world as if it's real, because I just find that style of storytelling much more fulfilling. And if I'm not bought in with the stakes of the story, I find it difficult to stay invested and to really want to continue hearing the story or being told the story. So,
Of course. I'd imagine that
yeah.
doubly so when you're DMing.
Yeah, I think a GM, needs to has every right to want to tell the story that they're telling, as long as they center the players as the main characters of that story. a GM, as I've famously said many times before, is not a slave to their players. They're not indentured to every whim that their players have, and the player, I want to do this because I think it would be funny or a cool idea. It's fine for a GM to be like, okay, well, that would not work in this world because of physics, that we're assuming are real. And hopefully those expectations are set at the start of a campaign or the start of a session. But yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. So how did you get to where you are? I think is the easiest way to ask that question. So
yeah, sure. Let me take a long breath in. The story keeps getting longer every year as we add another one. Yeah. Oh God, it's time. Grandfather time. He's catching up with me. Yeah. So I think this is true for a lot of people of what I refer to my generation of role players, tabletop gamers.
How old are you?
Well, this is the thing. I'm actually probably older than you think I am. I'm 34.
You're close to my age.
There you go. But I don't necessarily mean age.
Yes.
What I more so mean is like when you got into the hobby. Because I got in, like I think a lot of people who are recently in the hobby now during 5th edition and kind of the pre-COVID 2015, 2016 Critical Role, Matt Colville on YouTube kind of boom that happened before COVID hit, and then it all shifted again in a way and got bigger for different reasons. But I was of that generation. I think my first game was in 2017. And fell in love with the game instantly. I was a board gamer, and I was a video gamer, and I was a war gamer. I play tabletop war games a lot, but I'd never done role-playing games, which is weird because I'm a drama major. And just met some friends finally who had played it before, and they were like, we really think you'd enjoy this. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. I'd kind of been avoiding it because I was under the impression you needed to study a textbook to be able to play the game.
Right, yeah.
And I thought I'd get just as much enjoyment out of playing sort of campaign board games like Imperial Assault is the Star Wars kind of dungeon crawler I was playing at the time. And when I swapped and played D&D, I was like, oh, this is nothing like what playing a board game, even a campaign board game, is like. This is character development and role playing and performing and connecting with the characters on a really fundamental level. And very immediately went, I'm not satisfied playing only one character. I want to play all the characters. So it was like, I'm going to GM this. There's many other reasons as well why I like to be the GM, but that was kind of the initial impetus that got me into the GM seat almost immediately. And then from there, was kind of casual for a little bit, but just had a lot of people really, complimenting me on the way that I ran the game. Got a lot of players really enjoying wanting to play with me. And as part of that continued boom of popularity that D&D was seeing, and continues to see, but in that 2016, 17, 18, 19 years, or those 2016, 17, 18, 19 is what I mean. I just saw a lot of demand in Melbourne, where I'm local to, of people wanting to get into the game but not having a GM. And I was like, well, I want to run more games, but I got to make money and I got to eat and I got to like do all the other normal things a human needs to survive. But if you pay me to run the game, then I can make time for you.
Yeah.
And did a little bit of research about how I might do it. Started professionally GMing, did that for a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years before COVID really hit. Continued it through the early years of lockdowns. And then just by happenstance, honestly, I'd started doing a little bit of writing, meeting people in the local kind of Melbourne scene who are part of the small tabletop industry we have here in Australia. Was going to like PAX Australia. ArcanaCon was a convention that was kind of briefly revived here for a time. And so I was meeting people who organize games and things like that, who introduced me to other people, who introduced me to other people. Started writing adventures for events, kind of like Adventurers League, but it just wasn't Adventurers League. It was kind of our own thing that we were doing. So, was drawing on my creative writing background doing that. And then eventually, just by pure happenstance, and I'm pretty sure I've told this story before, but pure happenstance, I met 2 dudes in a bar where I was running an event. I wasn't running a game. I was running an event. And they called me over to the table and they were like, oh, what's going on here? And I was like, oh, these guys haven't heard of D&D before. Well, let me educate them. And I was like rubbing my hands together and getting ready for the sales pitch of like, oh, we're playing D&D. Have you guys ever played D&D before? And you might find it fun. Have you ever, you want to, come over and play some D&D? It's only, this much to play, whatever. And they told me that they were from a company called Ghostfire Gaming. Asked me if I'd ever heard of them before. And I was like, no. Which is an odd problem that Ghostfire kind of has, is that we're not as well known in our own backyard. As like we get recognized more when we go to American conventions than Australian conventions, which is kind of odd. And they basically were just looking for a position. They created a position for someone on the media side of the company. They wanted to create a YouTube channel. They wanted to create the podcast. They had a couple of other things that they wanted to do. And just talking with them over a couple of weeks, we realized very quickly it was going to be a very good fit. As I mentioned before, I genuinely just really love Grim Hollow and everything that it's about. And we worked together really well. And so they offered me a position, and that's kind of how it all started. And now it's been 3 years of working at Ghostfire, which has been, again, Father Time. Oh gods, what is happening? But yeah, and then, very fortunate to have met a lot of other really cool people within this industry who I've gotten to work with or hang out with, or, got to put together the Eldritch Lorecast, which is something that I'm very proud of, as a kind of regular hangout place for people to come and hang out with the regular hosts, but also the guests that we have, every other week or so. And getting to work now more directly on the actual products of Grim Hollow, by creatively directing how the books look and feel and the words that go in them and what's important to, what I think people want out of it as a setting. So yeah, I think that brings us up to date.
Yeah, no, looking back, every episode of this ends up getting a little existential because I'm 36 and I can't help it. And also a lot of the people I'm interviewing are around our age as well, so it's just like everyone's like, oh yeah, I got into back in, oh no.
Yeah, I mean, especially every generation, speaking actual age now, every generation is going to have their own experience, particularly of like 2020, 2021. I'm glad I wasn't in school at the time, but I feel like folks of our generation in particular kind of had, for me, like I turned 30 right before lockdown started, in like December 2019. And so there was a real flip where we came out of lockdowns and COVID, which, still kind of floats around and people need to be careful, but largely lockdowns lasted for two years here in Australia before they stopped doing them. And suddenly I was in my mid 30s and I was just like, what the happened? Like it was a bizarre kind of flip, suddenly
no,
I've got grays and people aren't telling me I've got the rest of my life ahead of me anymore. and like, oh no, I left my childhood behind. By childhood, I mean my 20s.
I was in my 20s a second ago. What happened?
Yeah, exactly. I was young and fun, and now I'm middle-aged. What happened? Well, I'm not middle-aged yet, because 40-year-old people will tell me I'm not. But we're in that age bracket where we're not young, but we're not.
As a 36-year-old,
haven't quite made it yet.
I feel like I'm like 5 minutes away from being 40, especially as someone with 2 kids, because they do accelerate this pace at which time goes just in general.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
It is wild. Right, that was the existential section, or at least one of them. Great. I'm sure we'll have some others.
We'll find out.
It sounds like you're using an absurd number of skills in your day-to-day work.
Yeah.
Like, so you picked up creative writing presumably during your drama major?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of I feel more increasingly confident in my skill set and my identity, I suppose, through my skill set as a person than I did earlier, because for a long time I kind of felt like a weird jack of all trades. Because yes, I have my degrees in creative arts, kind of brackets drama is the official title of it.
Okay.
So it kind of had a little bit of everything. Its main focus was performing arts and acting. But it did have a very strong creative writing component. It also had a very strong like cinema studies component to it. And then after graduating, I directed youth theater for a couple of years. I was a teacher for a few years. So I kind of did a little bit of everything. But I suppose the skill, I did podcasting for years before I was with Ghostfire as well. I did Will Do Art for Food was my first podcast. And a silly long name that I got off somebody else. And basically it was interviewing, kind of not too dissimilar to this format, to be honest, is like interviewing anyone and everyone who has a creative spark, and I talked to a lot of actors. I talked to comedians. I talked to like makeup artists and lots of different people. I talked to my grandfather, who was in no way sort of creative as a job, but he did painting and kind of doodling and things like that. And so I think that skill set, that kind of glom of different skills, I guess I think of myself, and this might sound a little bit auteur-y, I'm not sure, but I think of myself as a storyteller holistically, or as a director. I know how to structure and tell a story really effectively, even if I don't have the specific skills that an artist has to be able to realize the images that make up that story, or I don't have the skill sets as a musician to compose a piece, but I can tell that musician it should feel like this, and at this point we should feel like this, and I'd really like a strong kind of like piece to come in here. And I think for tabletop RPGs, it's like, okay, we need these encounters. We need this sort of decision to be made by the party at some point. The characters should have a little bit of a disagreement, ideally, and then they can move on. And then the climax of the story should look like this, So that's how I kind of define my skill set as a whole.
Makes perfect sense. It's just impressive. It's also nice talking to someone else who does a bit of everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Mine's mostly ADHD led, to be fair. So.
Oh, I think, ADHD is I'm not diagnosed, but I definitely have, like, whenever I see, like a TikTok or something describing symptoms, I relate to it, at least on a personality level, if not an actual kind of clinical level. But a lot of my friends are. I think that it's a very natural fit between like a creative impulse and just kind of struggling to focus on any one thing at one time or whatever, you know what I mean?
Chasing the good hormones basically means that you end up doing something creative. And I think that's what leads people to like tabletop RPGs in general. I desperately want to interview a psychologist to get like the absolute lowdown on this, because there is a huge crossover of not only just people that do creative work, obviously, and like YouTube, things like that, who are neurodivergent, but also specifically within the tabletop role playing community. There's definitely just a higher number of people with neurodivergency, I think, than there are in common, like in the standard world. And I do think it's just because it scratches so many itches at the same time. That's a whole other thing. But when you started the YouTube channel for Ghostfire, what was the process like on your end? Like how was the planning side of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. YouTube is its own fascinating skill set and kind of bundle of sticks. And as we've established well by now, it's kind of the theme of this interview almost. I'm 34. And a lot of my training in terms of creative arts is kind of old school. When Dante, who's the editor of the Lorecast, he's our digital media specialist. He does a lot of things. He composes, he edits our videos as well on the YouTube channel. He also does social media content for Ghostfire, creates shorts. He does a lot of things. I don't want to leave anything out, but I have ADHD brained my way out of forgetting my trail of thought. Why did I bring up Dante? When he got hired, is what I was going to say. He got hired only a little short time after me. And we had a lot of people who applied who knew how to like cut together car commercials and things like that, like really old school traditional media television style editing. And that is not the skill set for YouTube at all. And a lot of my training, like as a performer, as a presenter, is very like, almost news presentery sometimes. And so we went through a bit of a learning process on how to do YouTube effectively, especially from our earliest videos. And you'll see the earlier ones, we were in a different office as well before we came here. And I'm very like, hello, welcome to the video. I'm going to teach you about vampires and why they're scary. You know, like it's really over the top because I'm trying to be like YouTuber-y. And our more recent ones, I still have that kind of bombastic storyteller presenting style, but it's much more toned down. And creating content on a weekly basis is really stressful as well. To try and answer your original question about like process and planning and things like that, you're on a treadmill after you upload your first video if you want to keep a weekly schedule. And so writing, scripting, editing, coming up with an idea for a video, you know, all became really stressful, and it's really hard to think of ideas ahead when you're just trying to get a video made for this next week. It's why we only do bi-weekly uploads now for the main channel, is because it gives it basically a room to script, room for a week to script, shoot the video, a week to edit, and then I can start thinking about like what the next video is in that week of editing. So I don't know if that answers the question whatsoever. I'm just kind of blabbing at the moment.
It answers her question. I'm sure I'm sure we can fit them together at some point. It'll do.
Yeah, fair.
No one else can remember the question either, so it's fine.
Yeah.
What is it that you think makes Grim Hollow stand out from amongst the sea of third-party content, I hate the word content, third-party books and adventures and sources that there are for D&D?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we refer to it as kind of the preeminent dark fantasy setting for 5th edition. I think that there's a lot of kind of surface level answers that I can give there. I think our transformations are something that's pretty unique to Grim Hollow. Our take on doing transformations, I've seen other versions of it where it's like a subclass or it's feat based or something like that. None of those quite scratch the itch because you don't want to have to like wait for a feat slot after you get bitten by a werewolf. You know, you want that to start happening straight away. We've got things that are unique to the setting, like the Great Beast, which is this giant monster that roams around one of the nations, corrupting the world and twisting the world around it. And it's kind of a metaphor for nihilism and the fact that all things rot and die. We have kind of different flavors as well of dark fantasy throughout the kind of 5 main nations. Valika in the north is very Norse and Nordic inspired. The Burak Empire is kind of the Nilfgaard or the Roman Empire of the setting. It's very German inspired and kind of medieval. Astoria is very Gothic horror. It's ruled by a coterie of vampires. South we have Charnot, which is fae, kind of like twisted fairy tales. There's a great piece of art in the original campaign guide of an old grandma who's been like stabbed to death by 2 children, and it's really violent and it's great. But it kind of encapsulates Charnot for me as like a twisted Hansel and Gretel. And then Castanella, I think the Arcanist Inquisition, again, on that surface level, or at least the things that immediately jump out at people, magic is highly feared and restricted in Grim Hollow, and the Arcanist Inquisition are an organization that hunt mages with a righteous zeal. They have a point, like magic is dangerous within the context of this setting. And I think those elements kind of initially attract people to Grim Hollow. What I think really separates it out, because there are a lot of other dark fantasy settings and horror settings as well that have come up, especially in the wake of Grim Hollow, which was originally Kickstarted, I think, in 2020 or maybe late 2019, is that kind of what I touched on earlier, that authentic storytelling, that effective storytelling. Grim Hollow is not just about scaring the pants off your players or Halloween adventures. It can definitely do that, and we want people to use it to do that. But what it can also do is make your players reflect on the horrific nature of what it means to be human. The Crimson Court are really a metaphor for the corruption of power, which the Burak Empire is not ruled by vampires, and yet its government is just as corrupt and kind of rotten. And the Great Beast is a metaphor for the fall of civilization and how civilization kind of tears itself apart invariably. And so I hope, for me, what Grim Hollow means, and I don't think it needs to mean this to everybody, because everybody has their own relationship with their own fandoms, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Batman, but my relationship with that character is different to how other people might see that character, and the same with Star Wars and The Witcher and, like, you know, whatever else. But what Grim Hollow means to me is that ability to, through role playing, ask and explore potentially difficult questions in a safe environment where you can explore them from different angles, you know. Play Arcanist Inquisitors and see what that's like, and see how that kind of affects your thinking on certain issues, or you know, flee the Arcanist Inquisition if that helps scratch a specific kind of catharsis for you, or hunt the Inquisition yourself, you know, whatever you want to do with it. I hope that Grim Hollow has a real soul to it. It's the difference between grimdark, you know. I kind of chafe when people refer to Grim Hollow as grimdark. If people want to play it grimdark, that's totally fine and totally up to them. And I hope they take the ingredients we give them and have a lot of fun with it. But to me, grimdark is just like nihilism to the point of comedy. I was playing Space Marine 2 just the other day, and I was like, you know what this game needs is just at least a little bit of a sense of humor. Like, it's a great game, and I love Warhammer. Like, I've been collecting 40K since I was a kid. I love Warhammer. I love the setting, but it is like grim to the point of like comedy. When the stakes get so big, they become meaningless, you know? That's what I hope Grim Hollow has, is a real beating soul where people feel really connected to the world and their characters and the stakes they're in.
Cool.
I'm very verbose, by the way. I'll give you like half hour. I'm kind of Kevin Smith in that way. I just kind of like give half-hour answers.
I said this to Colby of D4, like, that is the ideal when interviewing someone, because that's the point. So it's fine.
That's fair.
If it helps, I recently apologized to Amy Vorpal for asking too many questions during the interview.
Right, there you go.
So, you know, we're all feeling weirdly self-conscious about our roles.
Well, that's my goal, is just to put you at ease so you don't feel like you're ever running out of questions. Because I've been an interviewer many times before, and when you're like, oh gods, I've got nothing left, like
what's your favorite color of jelly bean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that. Did you have any work at all in getting the most recent Grim Hollow piece onto D&D Beyond?
Yeah, absolutely, I did. Not from the kind of you know, I wasn't the one who reached out to Wizards or anything like that. Those conversations kind of happened a little bit above me, but once it got to the point of like ingesting the material, I got to work with a guy from D&D Beyond called Jay, who's on the software team, I believe, for D&D Beyond.
Okay.
And Jay's a legend. Like, I'll sing Jay's praises and until the sun sets, because part of the D&D Beyond team, as I said, and Jay and a lot of the folks who work on the D&D Beyond team and at Wizards of the Coast are like a fan of Grim Hollow and a fan of our content. And so talking to them, we got to, you know, anytime they would have a question or something, we would be able to answer it. And it became its own little creative kind of endeavor, especially in problem solving, getting things onto the software and to function in the software.
Yeah.
When we put Layers of Etheris on at the end of last year, we thought, let's get like an adventure module on there so that people can play in Etheris immediately.
Yeah.
And it's 20 adventures. It's level 1 to 20. This will be great. It gives people kind of an overview of the setting. They're kind of encapsulated adventures, so you can play them all in order, or you can just play them as one shots. But it gives you kind of a look at different parts of the setting. And then we were like, oh, but they've got a lot of like unique monsters, because that book was originally part of our Monster Grimoire setting campaign. Kickstarter is what I mean to say. Sorry. And so we were like, all right, well, can we ingest all those monsters as well? And they were like, yeah, of course. Like, they'll need the monsters to run the adventure, so let's ingest all of those as well. And we were like, okay, cool. And then they'd come back and they'd be like, some of these monsters have unique spells. Do you want us to ingest those as well? And we were like, yeah, if you're happy to. And they were like, yes, we're happy to. We'd love to. And we were like, okay, cool. Yeah, put all those in as well. And then famously, Grim Hollow, the Monster Grimoire, features salvage rules where you can take parts of a monster and turn them into something useful. You know, a witcher pulls out the mutagenic glands of a beast, and then he's able to use that to brew a potion. That was kind of the inspiration for it. And so they were like, many of these monsters have salvage. that are unique magic items that aren't like in the D&D core rules. Do you want us to ingest those as well? And we were like, okay, yeah, definitely. And then there were feats tied to the crafting rules for how you can use that salvage. And they were like, there are feats here. Do you want us to ingest those as well? And we were like, yeah, definitely. So we kind of ended up pulling on a thread, and a lot more came out than we anticipated. And Layers of Etheros is a really cool D&D Beyond product, I think, just speaking from my perspective, because it's virtually a mini monster grimoire. Like there's 75 monsters, I think, in there, plus the salvage mechanics and stuff. And we had a similar exciting experience with them working on the Grim Hollow Players Pack, which we put out a little earlier this year, where we were like, okay, so what do we want players to have in this pack? And I remember the very specific story was we were talking about just the Grim Hollow Players Guide at first. And I was talking with Jay about like, okay, these are the subclasses that might be good. What do you think? And he's like, well, these are really popular generally on D&D Beyond. So maybe look at these classes for the subclasses you want to put on there. And I was like, okay, that's a good direction. So there was a bit of creative jazz going back and forth. And then I just happened to mention offhand in a meeting we were having Raider's Guide to Valaka, which was our Norse-inspired supplement that has just been fulfilled now, I believe. Most people should be getting it by now. But we had a couple of subclasses in there, and those just hadn't been in my thinking at all, especially because those have unique martial maneuver mechanics that every subclass gets. And I just thought ingesting that to D&D Beyond will be a nightmare. So I hadn't even thought of it. And Jay goes, let me see that book. And I was like, okay. So I sent him a PDF, and he read it like overnight, or at least the subclass portion of it. He read it overnight, and he came back and he goes, yeah, I think we can do this. Let's put 2 Valaka subclasses in there. And I was just like, all right, sick. Like, fantastic. These 2 are really cool. Like, let's throw them in there. So yeah, it honestly, from my perspective, it's a really fun process. And having spoken to a couple of the other third-party guys, I think we spoke with Hit Point Press and Kobold Press and Griffin Saddlebag. We were all on a panel at Gen Con, kind of talking about our experience. And I think they've had a very similar, I don't want to speak for them, obviously, but I just from those conversations, they had a really similar experience. So, yeah.
Very cool. Do you have any idea if there's an update coming? You probably don't know this. I might end up cutting this little bit of the question. But at the moment, third-party subclasses don't work with the 2024 classes on D&D Beyond, and I just don't. Is that something that you're aware of as a publisher? Are you guys working on that with D&D Beyond, or?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to the D&D Beyond discussions, I mean, we're really concentrated at the moment on our next supplement. Our next Kickstarter, which starts in next week, actually, which is a refresh of the Grim Hollow campaign guide and player's guide. There's a multitude of reasons why we want to do that refresh and kind of redo those 2 core books. But part of the reason is because we want to update it for the 2024 rules specifically. So we're including a lot of the previous subclasses that were in the original Grim Hollow Player's Guide, but all of them will be updated to be fully compatible with the 2024 rules. Our new class that we're working on, the Monster Hunter, very Witcher inspired as well, and kind of fits into Grim Hollow and those salvage mechanics. It will be designed for the 2024 rules. We've had previous versions of it for 2014 that people have play tested, and we're getting feedback on currently. You can still play test it. But it will get an update to take into account things like weapon mastery and things like that to make sure that it's properly balanced. In terms of how that gets integrated onto D&D Beyond, we don't have anything to announce currently, but possibly. I mean, it would be great for sure.
Okay, cool. What are your plans like for like the future of the YouTube side of things at the moment?
We are. We've built a really cool little community. I was just reflecting on this earlier today, actually, with some colleagues, where over the last 12 months, I felt like we're reaching more people, which is really cool. And we also have a really consistent little community of the same people that are continuously commenting on our YouTube videos, but also coming and hanging out on stream and also watching the Eldritch Lorecast week to week. those are on two separate YouTube channels for reasons I can get into if you're interested. It's very academic, but we've got kind of a cool little melting pot community that's getting really tight knit. And basically, I just want to continue to grow that and keep those people interested in what we're doing, and continue to grow that real community vibe to it. Because being into the new metal of D&D genres, dark fantasy, you can sometimes feel a little bit on the outs. A lot of people will tell you online, D&D's 5e's the wrong system. You should be playing this instead, or whatever. And people are entitled to those opinions. And I play other games too, and I do think they're great as well. Like I really want to play 10 Candles as a kind of horror themed game, and I've played Dread and different things like that. But it is nice being able to connect with other people who like to play 5th edition D&D or fantasy games like it, whether it's Tales of the Valiant or I don't know, even Draw Steel. Maybe that lends itself to dark fantasy less than 5e. I'm not sure. I haven't played enough of it to know. But it's fun finding a community who enjoys playing the same games you like to play in the same way, and they find your content useful. That's what I really love, is feeling like I can reach through the computer screen, so to speak, and give the people watching the videos a little gift and say, like, hey, here's an idea that you can take and run at your table. And I hope it helps you have the same effective experience that I had at my table when I got to do this, and so more of that. The one thing that I would like to, what can be really hard on YouTube is branching out of your kind of niche that you put yourself into, because the people who come to your channel come there for a specific reason. And I know this about myself. There are YouTube channels that I go to, and they might have a podcast and they might have other content on that channel. And I don't engage with any of that other content because I just go there because I love their podcast and that's what I want to listen to, rather than their how to make a thing videos. So it can be hard to get out of your niche because it can cause viewership to kind of drop as people maybe aren't as interested. I'm still going to continue doing Grim Hollow content. That's never, ever, ever going away. But I would love to find ways to kind of explore outside our niche a little bit. We did a video last year on Arcane, the Netflix series, and how it is one of the most beautiful dark fantasy stories that I think's ever been put into media. It doesn't look like a dark fantasy show on the surface level because it's bright and colorful and kind of has a high fantasy feel to it, even though magic within it is, famously dangerous. But and that video didn't perform as well because maybe it wasn't what people were expecting from our channel as much. They want, the kind of Grim Hollow medieval feeling dark fantasy, which is fine. And there's going to be lots of that. But I'd love to do a little bit outside of that wheelhouse as well. How to do more kind of Arcane-like content where you do effective storytelling in other genres.
Cool. Do you see yourself, you're at work at the moment, right? This is going to be a weird place to ask this. Do you see yourself staying where you are from like a career perspective?
Yes, yeah, definitely. The fit between Grim Hollow and myself is so perfect that I love Grim Hollow in an unhealthy way. I've said this on the Lorecast before, and what I mean, and I love the Lorecast. If I wasn't at Ghostfire anymore, I wouldn't be able to continue doing that. But an IP that is owned by an organization can never love you the same way that you love it, right? Yes. And that's not good or bad. That's just kind of what it is, I don't own Grim Hollow whatsoever. And I shouldn't, it is not mine. It is everybody's. Everybody should be able to enjoy it, and other people should be able to bring ideas to it. And that's how you get what feels like a living world, is lots of people contributing to it. But I love the setting so much that very much for the time being, there's lots of corners of it that I want to explore. I'd love to do more within the Shano Kingdom because it is fairy tale inspired and elf inspired and kind of might not look like what you typically think of when you think of mud and blood style dark fantasy. I'd love to do more in the Castanellan provinces where the Arcanist Inquisition lives and really go into more detail there. And we're expanding the lore in our new core books that are coming. But I also want to do, more Valican style drill down books that really look closely at some of the other areas. So, yeah, I don't see myself moving away from Ghostfire anytime soon. As Uhtred of Bebbanburg says, fate is all, and I may end up elsewhere, but I don't see myself moving out of the tabletop industry or moving out of the kind of creative storytelling industry in any capacity. So,
do you get much chance to play D&D yourself still?
Yeah. It was very important to me to continue playing D&D after I got the job at Ghostfire. I was a professional GM, as I mentioned, before I started working at Ghostfire, and I was running like 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 games a week, which honestly actually isn't that much compared to what some other pro GMs managed to pull off. When I started at Ghostfire, it just wasn't tenable for me to continue running those games. I had to kind of step back from that business. I ended up handing it off to someone else, and they continued it for a time. But it was important that I never lost my home game. Got to keep my skills sharp, so to speak. I run with the same group of people that we've been running with since 2016 on a Thursday night. A year or two ago, I could have said basically almost unbroken, but fate is all. I think that's the quote. And things happen, and we're a little less consistent these days, but we're still playing together every Thursday night, whether it's D&D or another generally fantasy role-playing game. And that, I make sure to do that. I think it's really important if you're a game designer that you are, and an adventure author, that you are getting the perspective from different sides of the table many different times.
Yeah.
Because as a GM, I had certain expectations of my players that once I played a little bit more, I was like, oh, that's why the players do this, because it's fun,
Yes.
And so as a GM, I can get back behind the screen and be like, okay, I'm going to facilitate that fun now when previously I might have been annoyed by it. You know what I mean? And it could be something like, this is not necessarily to break the tone of the dark fantasy or the way that I want to run the game, but it could be something like, why do players really want to get the highest ability scores they possibly can as early as possible? Why isn't it okay to point buy or standard array, and then your ability score, goes up as the adventure goes on, your character grows? That's the point. This is the journey of your character getting stronger. And then as soon as I'm playing a Legolas style ranger, I'm like, I am an archery pro. I never miss. I'm going to make sure I've got at least a +10 in my, at level 1 or level 4, if not that, And I'm like, oh, okay. I see things from the player's perspective now. So now I understand why things are the way they are. The same is true for GMing. I'll sit in a player's seat. I'll see how another GM does it. And I'll be like, that was a great idea. I should do that. Or I might go like, that could have been better. And I think I can justify why I think I could, why I would make a change to that. Something I hate happening in 5th edition is getting arrested, which is just the claw of the GM coming out, grabbing the party from where they are and moving them somewhere else and dropping them where they need to be. And I've been arrested a couple times where it's like, there's just 50 guards. There's too many of them. What are you going to do? And I'm like, okay, I guess we just go with the guards. So I've made an effort never to arrest the party and just move them where I want them to be. You have to incentivize them to go where you want them to go instead.
Would you ever want to run an actual play, with you as the host?
Yeah, absolutely. To be fair, absolutely. To be honest, we've talked about this quite a lot. Folks ask us from time to time, "Hey, where can I watch you play? I'd love to, see you do an actual play." They're difficult, because they're time consuming. They can be expensive. We want to make sure that everybody is compensated fairly if they were going to give their time to us to be on an actual play. And it might mean that we can't do other things that we want to do as a result. We have one coming up actually at Gamehole Con. I'll be GMing a Grim Hollow one shot actual play.
Very cool.
Which I'm really looking forward to. And I think what we will try to do is more of that sort of stuff where maybe it's at a convention, or maybe it's in the lead up to an event or something, or maybe just because it's fun, but we do kind of, 3-session kind of little season or something like that, as opposed to like an 8-session season or a 3-year campaign. I think that would lend itself better to Grim Hollow as a setting as well, is kind of trying to tell not bite-sized stories, but just more intimate kind of encapsulated stories. So it's definitely something I want to do more of. It's just really difficult to find the time and allocating the resources in terms of even just personal energy is difficult. Especially because it's also a different, like, if I stopped running, let's just say hypothetically, I stopped running my Thursday night game to run an actual play because I'm, at least I'm running a game, and I'll put all my session prep into that actual play, and won't put anything more on my plate than just prepping for that Thursday night game normally. So it's kind of 2 birds, 1 stone. The problem is an actual play is a very different thing than like a private game. And I think if I was doing that, I would be exercising different skills, because I would be more concerned about, is this entertaining for people to watch? Is this story interesting? Are my players contributing? Are they engaged? As opposed to a private game, it's just like, okay, he's throwing like Cheezos just up in the air to see if he can catch him in his mouth, but it's not his turn, so whatever. Like, he has fun however he wants. That's not calling out anyone, for the record. None of my players are going to be like,
one of your players is just like, no.
yeah, exactly. Psychic damage. But you know what I mean? Like, and I think that me practicing GMing and understanding the structure of adventure writing and how to do that well, and how to tell stories in tabletop RPGs well, I am much better served doing that in a private game context and maybe a convention context. Even like running at conventions, as in public tables at conventions, because that is going to be the experience that people who love Grim Hollow are going to have much more often than an actual play. There are benefits to doing an actual play as well, which is like showcasing how I would GM a game quite literally, so people can see what they like about that. But, we only have so many hours in the day, and I'm also involved in writing books and stuff as well. So
very cool. I think that's all my questions. So is there anything particular that you want to plug?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to plug. I don't know when this is coming out, but if people are interested,
it's coming out this Thursday.
Okay, so it's coming out quite quickly. Well, next on the 1st of October, I think that's Tuesday. On the 1st of October, 10 a.m. US Eastern Standard Time. I know it's midnight Australia. I don't know what it will be in the UK. But that is when Grim Hollow Transformed is launching. It's our new Kickstarter. So if people have, they found what I'm talking about interesting and they want to check it out, you can go to the Kickstarter page and follow if it hasn't launched yet, to get more information, or if you just want to see what it's all about. And also, I would be remiss not to, like, if you want to hang out, come hang out at the Eldritch Lorecast. We're there every single week. Ghostfire Podcasts is the name of the YouTube channel. But you can also find us on Spotify and iTunes and all the places where podcasts are, and we do news, and I'm really bad at plugging things. I just kind of like waffle on, but come check it out. I don't know, it's a good time, I think.
In the description, so
in the doobly-doo.
We get the wonderful goodbye, which is actually Antonio's fault, where we just look at the camera and wave awkwardly, and then I cut it.
Oh, okay, great.
So you ready?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Bye.
Hey,